Hello, I'm Robert Holmberg. I'm a member of Science Outreach Athabasca, and this presentation is about traps for studies in ecology. So the topics we'll cover are characteristics of traps, and then the kinds of traps. They're passive, such as the pit, funnel, and barrier traps. The ones that use attractants or lures that can be visual or food or odors or habitat even. And then there's traps with assisted movement, and then there's camera sort of traps. Okay, characteristics of traps. A trap is a device used to capture an organism. Simple thing. Usually it's for mobile animals, and it often will save time and energy for biologists to use traps, and sometimes it's for human safety. So purposes of traps. Some traps are used for getting food, some to obtain animal products like furs, others to collect or kill pests, and then there's to detect presence of certain species, obtain specimens for study, and to determine abundance of organisms. So, whoops. So for the first three that are in green, that's not really the purpose of this presentation, even though I mention it occasionally. We're going to concentrate on detecting the presence of organisms, obtain specimens, and determine abundance. That's the things that we usually use them for in ecological studies. Okay, the organisms to trap have to involve movement in some way because the traps are usually stationary, but not always. So they can move themselves across along the surfaces or whatever, and the medium which they live, like air or water, it moves, or the traps move through the medium. So there's got to be movement in one way or another. So the organisms are moving are usually in two dimensions, such as things going over the surface of land or the substrate of water, or three dimensions, and those are usually flying or swimming organisms. So traps can be designed to kill the organisms they collect or to keep them alive. So killing can be done in various ways. There are poisons, or what I call biocides. They can be drowned. They can have mechanical trauma like a snap trap. They can use heat that goes for desiccation. Also, you could use cold in the same way, but that would be unusual. There's a few of them use electrocution, and a few of them use ionizing radiation. So there's three variables when you're looking at trapping. It's the organism that's to be trapped, the characteristics of the trap itself, and then the environmental factors that interplay with things. So the organisms to be trapped, you have to look at their stage of the life cycle. So if you're looking for dragonflies, the adults are terrestrial and aerial, while the larvae are crawling and in the water. And the sense organs that they have, the different kinds and the sensitivities of these sense organs, and various behavioral characteristics. How do they locomote? What attractants will bring them in, and whatnot. Okay, trap characteristics. Well, you're trying to capture your target organisms and exclude non-target organisms. And this is often very, very difficult. And the materials, the durability, the portability of these things, the cost, all of these things factor in. And then the position, like often traps are at different heights. And if you're using attractants, you can use shapes, you can use color, you can use light, you can use various chemicals, all kinds of things like that. And then the environmental factors, you've got to look at the meteorological conditions of temperature, for example, rain and wind or current. And then there's competing attractions like nearby feeding, breeding, or oviposition sites. And for, say, insects that are attracted to light, moonlight is a distraction. And there's other deterrents, such as presence of predators or parasites that are nearby to your traps. Okay, so now we move into the second part of the presentation. This is the kinds of traps. So some traps can be designed to be passive. And others use attractants or lures to entice the organisms to enter the trap. And as I say, they can be visual, heat, chemical, habitat, all kinds of things. And you can also use traps that assist movement in the trap, like suction. Okay, so passive traps, I've divided them into three kinds, basic kinds. There's pit, funnel, or barrier, but actually, in reality, often these things are combinations of these factors. So pit traps is just a cavity in the substrate, a hole in the ground, and then essentially for organisms that move in 2 dimensions along the surface of the substrate. So pit traps can be dry, and this is usually for organisms that you need to check for daily, especially in cave and desert environments where the animals are quite rare and you don't want to over-trap them and kill out the species. Or they can be wet, and that uses either simply water or some liquid preservative. So here's an example of an insect or an arachnid pit trap in beach sand. That orange thing is my boot to show you relative size. And this is just nothing but a plastic container with some preservative in it. So here's an example of a pit trap in a forest. You can see some of the beetles and other insects that were trapped in it. So all these pit traps are dug into the surface, and the top of the container is about level with the ground. The organisms crawl along the ground and fall in and get trapped by the preservative or just the pit trap itself. So often they're covered, and these covers will help exclude non-target organisms. They also keep out rain, so that, because if a lot of rain came, the water would wash out the things you were trying to collect. So here's an example of a metal pit trap, and it has a roof made out of tin, and the tin is bent at the four corners to raise it off the ground. Otherwise, to raise the lid, you can use stones or sticks, or there are various pins or nails that you could use to do the same thing. So you want a small enough space for them to crawl through and then fall into the pit trap. And often you want to keep the lid on, and to maybe camouflage the trap, you can use sod, litter, rock, or whatever. But you have to be careful, because sometimes I've used a little bit of camouflage and have lost my traps. So I started marking the first of the traps with a little flag, and the end of the trap line with a flag, and then put them at set intervals. And you can look in the literature of what intervals are best for your particular organism. So here's a modification of a pit trap. This is called a ramp trap. It's a Canadian invention, and it just has 2 ramps that allow organisms to move into the pit trap and fall in. And this is often used in rocky ground or in places where you don't want to disturb the vegetation, such as in a golf course. And I was quite surprised that these things actually work. And even earthworms will crawl up that space and fall into these pit traps. Now, pit traps can be enlarged to capture larger things, and this illustration shows what would be a tiger trap. And this is an advertisement for a YouTube video that was actually trapping a live smaller cat than this. This tiger has been superimposed as an image on the trap that's used in the video. And it did catch a small native cat, and it was alive. So it fell down through that space and couldn't get out. But tiger traps have also used in terms of using as a tiger as a pest, as getting into trouble. And this pit trap with pointed sticks at the bottom is actually to kill the tiger. But this was also used in guerrilla warfare in Southeast Asia against humans. Okay, capture fluids. Water is the simplest, and if you have to check the traps every few days, otherwise you're going to get mold and bacterial action that will maybe destroy your specimens. And often, if you're looking at, say, small insects, you would need soap to break the surface tension so the animals actually get into the water and not just on the surface. And then there's various preservatives, and this means that the traps can be left out for weeks or in some cases even months before they're checked. And ethanol or other alcohols are the usual preservative for arthropods. And you can also use propylene glycol. You don't want to use ethylene glycol. Ethylene glycol is used as antifreeze for vehicles, but a teaspoon or more of that will kill a dog or coyotes or other mammals. So you often will use a sieve to get out arthropods, say, but also leaf debris and whatnot, and then you can recycle the fluid preservative for many months or even years. You can use pit traps in the wintertime, and this is a pit trap line that I was using to catch spiders that matured very late in the season or very early in the spring. And it's just the cover is attached to a metal wire that holds a flag, and underneath you can just lift the flag and there's your pit trap. And there's actually two containers. One container gets frozen into the ground, and the other container you can lift out and has a preservative, and you catch arthropods. And it's very surprising, but this works to at least minus 40, even at least minus 20, if not minus 30, and maybe even minus 40 degrees Celsius. And because what happens is that the snow goes down onto the ground and then starts to melt a little bit, and is raised up, and there's what is called a subniveal space where insects and spiders and things can crawl underneath the snow, but on top of the leaf litter, and then fall into the pit trap. And then what you do is you just lift up the flag again, put it down, maybe put a dusting of snow on top of it, and you can trap all winter long. Now, I have used pit traps for a long period of time, and I've collected various non-target things, especially insects. You get all kinds of insects that you really are not interested in and don't want to collect, but you do. And occasionally you get earthworms, depending on the situation, small rodents, shrews, amphibians of various kinds, and once I even caught a bat. I don't know what the bat was doing crawling around on the ground, but it went into the pit trap and died. So on our second kind of passive traps, we'll look at funnel traps. And this is a typical funnel trap, so a large opening at one end and it narrows down to a small opening or no opening. And this is actually a fish trap for food, and it probably has some spines or spiky-like things at the base of it will prevent the fish from turning around and coming out. But these funnel type of arrangements are used for all kinds of ecological traps. So here's a couple of homemade wasp traps made out of recycled beverage containers. So the one on the left has a funnel going into the middle of it. The other one is got a funnel going down, and the fluid is an attractant. It's usually a sugary substance for wasps. But butterfly nets are a funnel, and often you see pictures of people rushing around on the ground swinging the net. But often the best way of catching a butterfly is wait till it lands, put the net over top of it, and then disturb it in some way. It flies up into the funnel. You grab the funnel below the butterfly, and you've got it collected. So here's a minnow trap, and this is a double funnel trap. This is on shore, and this is what it looks like when it's in the water. So there's no bait or anything. They just the fish will swim into it and then get collected inside. Here's another set of funnel traps. This is the Lindgren funnel traps. This is used for tree insects, especially bark beetles. So they are attracted to this vertical dark structure that looks like a tree trunk to them. They fly into it. It stops their momentum. They fall down through one or several funnels and then get collected in a collecting fluid at the bottom. So the third type of passive trap are barrier traps of various kinds. This is a bat trap. It's set usually in a forest corridor where bats usually fly. It's made up of nylon lines that the bats do not be able to detect. They fly into it. Again, it stops their momentum and they fall down into this canvas bag. And then you can retrieve them and tag them, weigh them, identify them, whatever you're trying to do. So here's another barrier trap. This is called the window trap. This is for flying insects, and they fly into this plexiglass sheet, again, breaking their momentum. They fall down through the funnel into some preservative. Here's another barrier trap. You can't really see the vertical barrier because it's covered by this roof, but low-flying insects will fly into this barrier and then drop into these aluminum pans of preservative. Here's another barrier trap. This is used for black flies, and it's that plexiglass sheet is covered with a sticky substance or gluey substance, and you can see the thousands of black flies that you can collect with that kind of trap. Here's another barrier trap. This is for horse flies. It has an electrocution grid, high voltage, and they fly into it, get electrocuted, and drop down onto the plywood sheet where you can collect them. This is another barrier trap. It's called a malaise trap, and this one has one vertical netting. Insects fly into it, and then they go up through a funnel-like apparatus into a collecting container. Here's another malaise trap. This time it has got 4 segments of barriers and then the major funnel of the tent-like thing going up into a collector. Here's a close-up of the collector. It's got a funnel at the bottom, and then at the top you can put an insecticide or just leave it empty and collect live things. Now you can also use barriers as sticky substances, and this is an example. This is actually for pest control, and this is for caterpillars that would be normally crawling along the substrate and then going up the trunks into the foliage to feed. And this was after they were used for the spring and summer, and they also collected a bunch of moths that got onto it, but they were actually meant for caterpillars. But there's various of these sticky barrier traps that are used for rodents, insects, spiders. I've used one and collected a couple of rats on them, so they're quite effective. Here's an example of a sticky trap that's got some insects and spiders on it. Here's another sort of barrier trap. This is called a quick trap. This is made from a section of a steel barrel and covered up with canvas on the top, and it's supported on a tripod, and the tripod legs are attached with springs to the barrel. You pull the line, it releases it, and it quickly drops to the ground and collects what other insects are underneath of it. And then you go with a portable vacuum cleaner and suck out insects or spiders or whatever you're interested in. Here's a dry pit traps and barricades for golden moles in the Namib desert. You can see the barrier, and there's 3 pit traps along the edges. So as I said, a lot of these traps use a number of different mechanisms to collect whatever you're looking at. Okay, now the third type of traps we're going to talk about are traps with attractants or lures. And food or food odors are very common and used. So this is an example of a pit trap that's used for garden slugs. Again, this is for control of pests, but can be used for studying slugs. And here's the pit trap on the right and the cover on the left. They fit together quite nicely. And you use beer as an attractant. It works very well for attracting slugs. So this pit trap was used for collecting dung beetles, and how it was operated is that the researcher used a little tripod with a muslin bag that held some feces, and the feces would attract the insects to the trap, and that's how it operated. Okay, this is another commercial trap. This is a lobster live trap, and but again, showing how these traps usually work with a funnel system. This with netting, they walk through the opening, get into the cage, and they're virtually two-dimensional capture area. Here's a snap trap, so it just does trauma to kill small rodents and shrews. And this is the bottom one is not a real mouse. That's a plastic mouse. So no mice were killed in making that photograph. And in case you're ever interested in trapping rodents, peanut butter is a very good attractant, and cheese is not. So here's another small rodent trap. This one captures them alive. So the upper figure shows the trap set up, and you put some bait in the top right-hand corner. The mouse enters the trap, goes to the bait, and its weight will bring the trap down, and then the door will close, and you've got a live mouse. Here's a bigger live trap for mammals. There's a squirrel, and we used peanut butter to capture him. Now, leg hole traps have been used especially in the fur industry for centuries, but now they're banned in most countries. They come in various shapes and sizes, and they use a treadle or triggering plate. So an animal steps on that trait and gets their leg caught. And these things can be used be large enough to capture bears. But now, these days, we use live traps for bears, and this is a mobile bear trap. You can see the door that closes on the top right, and the inside has a beat bag. The bear grabs hold of it to tear it apart, pulls a rope, and closes the hatch behind him. And then you'd have to tranquilize the bear if you're studying it, and that's how they work. So we're moving back to this barrier trap for black flies, and this time it's showing some perforated tubing underneath of it, and that's using cattle odor to attract black flies to the trap. And then you say, well, how do you get cattle odor? Well, you make some small enclosures for calves, and you take some fans and move the fans across the animals and through the tubing up to the trap. And these calves are put in the shade so that they don't overheat. Another way of doing it is allowing the cattle odor to rise from an underground collection area. This was used in Africa for studying tsetse flies. This one was done in Canada for black flies. Okay, so we can talk about visual attractants rather than food attractants. And so many plant-feeding insects are attracted to yellow, not green, but yellow. So this is a pan trap or pit trap that's just an aluminum container painted yellow and put with a preservative and put out, and you'll get plant-feeding insects such as aphids and various bugs. And then blood-feeding flies are often attracted to dark colors. So this is a calf trap, and that's made with black cloth. So the black flies are attracted to the dark color, but also the warming of temperature by the sun. And these particular black flies that they're trying to capture will often fly to the underbelly of the cattle to feed. So that is open in this space, and they go up and then get into the trap. And this one is also supplemented by carbon dioxide in that cylinder. So many nocturnal and crepuscular, that means insects that fly at dawn and dusk, are attracted to light, and especially to ultraviolet light or UV light. So this is a insect light trap, and they're attracted to that light, a UV light in the center. And how they work with this is that the insects are attracted to light, but they don't fly straight in. They tend to fly in a decreasing spiral and get closer and closer to the light, but they're circling it, and then they'll hit the baffle, break their momentum, fall down through a funnel into a collecting container. And it could be preservative or a cloud of insecticide. Here's another sort of barrier trap using a UV light for capturing live moths. So you put out the trap at night, moths are attracted to it. They fly into the sheet or piece of white cloth, and they settle there, and then you can pick them off with forceps or your fingers or an aspirator of some type, and get the insects. This, I think, is using a UV light. It is a flea trap, and if you get that many fleas, you've got problems. So you can use visual attractants. This is a mosquito trap with a rotating stripe. So this was developed for the high Arctic, where sun never sets during peak of summer, and so you can't normally use a light to attract them because it's light all day long, all night long. And so they've developed this trap, and it rotates, and the stripes attract the insects to the trap. This is a Manitoba horsefly trap. It's also a Canadian invention. And the attractant is this spherical black ball. And this particular trap, to catch them live, uses a funnel apparatus made out of plastic, goes up into a collector at the top. This one is also supplemented with carbon dioxide, but we were looking at other chemicals that could attract horseflies. And this has been used commercially. So they took the idea of this black sphere that seems to attract these flies. Some people think that it's the highlight of the sun shining on the black sphere that makes it most attractive. And then the company that produces this gives you a sticky substance that you paint onto the ball, and you can see that it attracts hundreds, if not thousands, of horseflies. And another attractant you can use are sex attractants. This is a moth pheromone trap that monitors a certain kind of moth, and if it's a problem, then they do some control for orchard situations. Then you can actually have attractive habitats. So we often think of bird houses as just a house for birds, but really they're an oviposition site for birds. And in a way, if you want to look for the range of a bird, you put out some bird houses and see if they get say bluebirds attracted to them, and you can find out the range, whether it's expanding or contracting or whatever, and the population dynamics. But you can do the same thing for insects. This is a commercial available to increase the diversity of bees and wasps in an area, and all those circular things or cylindrical things are used for oviposition sites for wasps. But the vertical slots are usually for butterflies that are trying to overwinter. So they go through those, and then they will stay overwinter, and that's their site. This is another habitat thing. It's called a Dendy Sampler. If we look on the left-hand side, there are squares of plastic that are held together by a bolt and a nut and some washers to separate them. Then we go over to the right to number 2. This is one of these Dendy samplers that has been in the water for some time. Got a weight on the bottom to keep it keep it submerged, and various things like cyanobacteria, algae, various invertebrates will go onto this new habitat. And then you can take it into the lab like in 3 and take it apart and count the organisms or collect the organisms. Oops. Now we move on to traps with assisted movement. And one example of this is fans that sort of suck in the insects. So this is a CDC or Center for Disease Control trap that was developed in the United States. It has some batteries that run a light and a small fan. So mosquitoes are attracted to the light, and then the fan sucks them into this mesh bag. So we'll move back to this trap again. Besides the stripes attracting the mosquitoes to this trap, there is a fan that sucks them into a similar bag as the CDC trap. So we've talked mostly about animals, but pollen and spores can be trapped and sucked in with a fan. This was set up by a colleague who was studying when fungi produce spores, and it's done in the wintertime. So inside of this trap is a sticky band that it goes out at a certain rate, so you can time what time of the day, or tie it with meteorological observations to find when the spores or pollen grains are put out. Then we talk about various terrestrial and aquatic nets, aquatic ones at the top and the terrestrial ones at the bottom. And we're going to look at first, look at plankton net, this one on the top. So plankton nets are for collecting zooplankton, phytoplankton, and they're usually towed with a boat or moved by hand through water. And they can be fairly large, like in this photograph at the bottom. And you can stand on shore and move your net through the water, or you can get your feet wet and move in and do it that way. Often you'll need a light colored tray to put the specimens on, and then you can pick out which ones you're interested in. And you can use aquatic nets with assisted movement with, say, in a stream and the water flows through them, or you can move it through it, or you can kick rocks with your feet and dislodge things that are under the rocks and collect things that way. This is a seine net used near the shore for collecting fish. See the pocket at the left-hand side. This is also used commercially in a larger scale for catching fish for food. And here's the use of sweep or beating nets. You go through the vegetation, move the net through, knock the insects off the vegetation and into the conical net. And you can add extensions to such nets and get insects that are high up in the canopy. And this is a motorized sweep net, so it's collecting insects at different heights, and it's just rotating around and collecting them, and then you can see again which insects are flying when and at what height. And a beating tray is similar to a pit trap in a way, but you're hitting the vegetation with a pole or any such a thing, and again knocking the insects off the leaves and into something that you can then look at and pick out what you're trying to find. This is another way of knocking insects out of the canopy. This is using insecticides from very high tropical trees and seeing what's up there without risking falling if you go up the trees. Now we'll talk about camera traps, which are not really traps because instead of capturing an organism, they're capturing an image, a photograph or a video of usually a large animal. And this was initially developed for hunting purposes rather than ecological purposes, but they're used today now for looking at, say, big cats and all kinds of other animals. So this is a typical camera trap. And it's a camera with the fixed lens, so it focuses on anything from a few centimeters away to infinity. So the lens doesn't focus usually, and they have some kind of motion sensor that then triggers the camera to take a photograph or a video. So, but these days, these things are all digital, they're battery powered, they're water resistant, they're easily mounted on a tree trunk as in this photograph, or on a post. And my thing does not want to move. So there's usually a flash with it, and they used to have normal camera flashes, but that usually startled animals. So we've gone to infrared flashes, which the animals usually don't see. And because they're digital, you can get date, time, moon phase, temperature, all kinds of data associated with the photographs. And nowadays they can communicate with cell phones. So as soon as the trap the camera is triggered, you can get a message on your cell phone and see the image without going to the trap itself. So here's an example of a good day image. This was a moose, and on the left-hand side at the bottom, the green is talking about the advertisement for the camera that was used. But then moving to the right, you can see it was done. The temperature was 2 degrees Celsius. The circle represents a full moon. It was done on the 27th of October in 2015 at 8:46 a.m. and the camera's name was AU Biology. So here's another example of a good day image. So from these camera traps, you can indicate presence of organisms, when they're active, when they give birth, maybe even sometimes what food they're feeding on. Most of them go into black and white imaging at night. You can see the reflection of the deer's eye from the infrared flash. But some of the better cameras today are taking photographs in color at night. And these traps are detected. This is a deer detecting either the smell or the sound or even the visual of the trap, and she's investigating the camera. And bears don't like these things and will often tear them apart. And just like with other traps, you have to be careful about how they're oriented. So with camera traps, the setting or rising of the sun will cause flare and ruin images. But most of the images that you detect with these traps are just not what you're looking for, because they're triggered with wind moving leaves or insects flying by, or rain, snow, all kinds of things will trigger them. So most images look like this, and it's not what you were after. And this will also happen at night. This particular trap was triggered by my cat, shown by the arrow, and it was not what I was looking for. So we've gone through the characteristics of traps, the kinds of traps, a pit funnel barrier traps that are passive. We've looked at attractants or lures, visual, food, odors, habitat, all kinds of other things, assisted movement, and we've looked at camera traps. And that's the end of this presentation. I hope that you've enjoyed it, and you will look at other Science Outreach Athabasca presentations. Thank you.